All right, joining me now, we're going to get into that big housing announcement from Labor today and more is Sky News senior reporter Caroline Marcus and the IPA's Deputy Executive Director Dan Wild. Well, Caroline, all smiles today for the Prime Minister, actually back in the country for a change, alongside Clare O'Neil, the Housing Minister. Very staged events for the media and the cameras there, spruiking the 5% deposit scheme for first home buyers. But even the PM forced to concede that opening this scheme up to anyone, regardless of their income, is going to see those house prices increase. Here he is again.
It will have a minimal impact. There will be a slight increase in prices, but already 185,000 Australians have benefited from this scheme with minimal impact on prices. Treasury did modelling. They suggest a very small increase.
All right, increasing prices is the last thing home buyers need at the moment, but I've got another concern, and that's about the debt burden that taxpayers are going to cover here. We're going to be on the hook to guarantee a portion of these loans. And, you know, I remember the GFC, I remember the subprime crisis. That's a worry too.
Well, someone has to pay for it, right, Peter? So if a home buyer, a cash-strapped home buyer who takes up one of these 5% deposit schemes, and it's even lower, by the way, it's 2%. That's all you have to put up if you're a single parent and you're eligible for the scheme. So if they take up this offer, but then they find they can't make their repayments, then who is going to stump up for the mortgage lender? In the past, you'd have to fork out for expensive mortgage lender insurance if you didn't have a family that could guarantee you. In this case, it's going to be Housing Australia, which, in other words, is us, the taxpayer. So if, you know, the interest rates continue to go up or stay the same and these people's circumstances change or whatever happens, and for what happens to many Australians, they can't make their repayments, it's us that is going to be paying for it. So ultimately, it could be a huge problem.
Yeah, particularly because these first home buyers are often the biggest risk entrants into the housing market. But it's not just price, Dan. A big issue, of course, is supply. We had those comments yesterday from the RBA governor. She was pouring cold water over any idea that Labor's going to build 1.2 million new homes. Have a listen.
The problem in the housing market is a structural deficit of supply. That is the problem. And governments now get that, and you are seeing some action on that, but it's going to be slow to work its way through.
Now, you and I know she's got the best research at her fingertips. She's not bought off by the Treasury spin. That's her view. And it's also backed up today by the Master Builders Association. They're saying that building approvals have hit a 12-month low for townhouses and apartments. That's even dropped a whopping 11% in August. So, you know, this is a government that's all hat, no cowboy, Dan. You know, really big on the announcement, but just not enough happening in terms of tangible outcomes.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we've been tracking the National Housing Accord since it kicked off in July of last year, and it has failed. It is a complete and total public policy failure. It is already 62,000 houses behind where it is supposed to be, which is about 20% off target. It is never going to meet the target that they've set of 1.2 million homes. And you've got the supply problem, but you've also got a demand problem. We've got this mass migration program that is cranking up demand into the housing market at the exact time as we can't get enough supply onto the market. Now, of course, the problem here is not with the migrants themselves, because Australia is the greatest nation on earth. And of course, you'd want to come here. But the problem is the government has had a complete and total lack of planning and a total failure to have the infrastructure in place before we have this massive population surge. And exactly as you were discussing before, the home buyer deposit scheme is also going to throw fuel on the fire, increasing demand at a time where we don't have supply. Everybody knows what's that going to do to prices. It's going to go up and up and up.
And Dan, just a comment too, if you can, on BHP talk that their iron ore cargoes from the Pilbara into China have been blocked. I mean, we just had the Prime Minister there for a 6-day visit in Beijing. He's best mates with Xi. I know he went after Scott Morrison for trade delays and other issues out of COVID. But, I mean, this is hypocrisy writ large if Albanese now is doing nothing more than saying, you know, he'll raise it with the Chinese.
Well, exactly right. I'm worried that Australia is becoming essentially a vassal state to the Chinese Communist Party, and we've got a very meek leader in Anthony Albanese who's been kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party. And I think what this further demonstrates is that our economic dependency on China is now too substantial. China is able to use that for political leverage. And yes, of course, we can and should have a trading and commercial relationship with China, but that cannot come at the expense of our strategic imperatives. And look, the reality is that our values and our long-term strategic interests are not aligned with the Chinese Communist Party. So I expect that we're going to see a lot more of this sort of leverage being deployed for China to try and get a political outcome. And I just don't think Anthony Albanese is up to the job.
All right, let's go back, Caroline, to that speech last night by Pete Hegseth to the military brass, the fat ones as well, at Quantico, because he certainly didn't miss.
No more identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses. An entire generation of generals and admirals were told that they must parrot the insane fallacy that, quote, our diversity is our strength. The words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign.
Now, it's really important to underscore this point. He is not saying that women are barred from combat roles. Absolutely. He says, knock yourself out, audition for promotion, but you must meet the same physical standards as everyone else in the field for that test. And he's also saying if you're an out-of-shape man, if you're not strong enough to have a combat role, you won't get one either. And I have to say, these jobs are life and death roles. I back him in 100%.
And isn't it refreshing? When was the last time you heard the word fat on television? I mean, and he is, I'm surprised he hasn't been called out for body shaming people and not calling them weight challenged generals. No, it is really refreshing, and it's common sense as well. Women who've been fighting for equality for generations, we should be wanting to be held to the same standard and not have lower standards when it comes to this thing. It's not only life and death roles, these close combat frontline positions, but it's about keeping your country safe and fighting for your country, national security, really. We need the best of the best, and that, if that means a woman can pass the fitness test, then more power to her, good for her, but they need to be able to be held to the same standard as the men who are sitting for those tests as well. I also note that Trump addressed the crowd too. He said that it's going to be a question of merit and not political correctness when they're making appointments and promotions. That's welcome news as well. And maybe people with beards should also take offence at this, Peter, because there's going to be new grooming standards as well for the military. And Pete Hegseth says he doesn't want any more beardos among his generals and his troops. So maybe they should be as equally offended as any people sticking up for any women who might feel slighted by this.
I know, I love it. I love it. I love it. Let's go to that story today that David Christofouli has given a golden handshake. I'm assuming it was because of the contract he had to a bloke called Mike Kaiser, who was under the former Labor administration in Queensland, one of the senior bureaucrats up there, so within the public service. Only he's one of the biggest ALP political operators we've got in the country. He's been a campaign chief for Labor. He's been on the inside of the political machine. Well, he gets a $400,000 payout by the Queensland taxpayer, and then almost immediately he pockets that money. He gets picked up by Albo and made the bureaucrat-in-chief of the Climate Change Department. Now, help me unscramble this, because Dan Wild, you know, the political staffer and the public servant don't usually trade jobs like this bloke has for much of his career.
Well, that's right, but sadly that is often the case these days, and I think, you know, the era of having a independent, impartial public service is sadly well and truly behind us, and you know this from your time in politics and in and around government. You know, Labor does a very good job of getting their guys in there. That's what they do. When, you know, everywhere you turn, you're tripping over former Labor staffers who are in positions of authority in the public service. Now, I'm sure that there are some who still do the right thing. But at the end of the day, maybe this is the only way you can get rid of these people, because I think if you're a new government coming in, you've got every right to have the people in the positions that you think are going to be needed to carry out your government's agenda. In Queensland, Labor was there for 10 years, so you'd assume that there'd be a lot of Labor appointees and Labor operatives in and around the government. But, certainly I think that this is just further evidence that, sadly, you cannot trust the public service to be independent and impartial. Many of them are political operators and
but just remember, look, I agree that they should be able to hire and fire and put their people in, or people that they trust that are not going to be advocates for the other side, into these senior public servants' jobs. But I really object to a hardcore political operative like that being appointed into a position like the Climate Change Department. I have no confidence now in anything that's going to come out of that department. It's a 900,000 job. It should be to a senior public servant who is there to do the public's bidding, not the ALP's work.
Yeah, well, I certainly share that view. And I think this does, as you say, further erode the trust in the public service, unfortunately. And there are many people there that do the right thing. But, I think that, to me, this also shows that Labor really plays hardball. When they get into government, they don't muck around. They get their people into positions they want in order to execute an agenda. And I just think that's the reality of modern politics now. And I think the coalition needs to be taking notes. Don't let these people hang around when you get into government, because you've only got one shot to get the job done, and you've got to make sure you've got your people in the top jobs.
Yeah, sadly, I think they're dragging politics down, and then the Libs have got to match them on how bastardised the whole thing's become. I'll leave it there. Thank you both.